Christianity did not begin as a religion. It began as a journey upward. Long before churches, before doctrine, before belief became obedience, there were men who claimed they could leave the earth and return alive. They wrote about ascending through hostile heavens, guarded by beings that tested the soul itself. They warned that saying the wrong name could erase you. These texts were not metaphors. They were instructions, and what they described became the foundation of Christianity. But here is what no one explains. If ascent was once possible, why was it sealed? And who decided that heaven was no longer reachable? Before Christianity became a religion of churches, creeds, and emperors, it was something far more dangerous. It was a religion of ascent, a belief system rooted not in faith alone, but in the idea that a human soul could rise beyond the limits of the physical world and enter the realms of angels, thrones, and divine fire. This idea did not originate with Jesus. It did not begin with the apostles, and it certainly did not emerge from Rome. Its roots reach back into the apocalyptic imagination of ancient Jewish mystics who believed that heaven was not a distant metaphor, but a layered structure that could be entered, navigated, and survived by the prepared. To understand Christianity, one must first understand ascent. In the centuries leading up to the birth of Jesus, Jewish thinkers were living in a world defined by occupation, exile, and cosmic anxiety. Empires rose and fell over Jerusalem, and with each conquest came a deeper question. If God ruled the universe, why did foreign powers dominate the chosen people? The answer many mystics arrived at was not political, it was vertical. They believed that the true structure of power existed above the earth, in the heavens, and that the corruption of the world below mirrored conflicts taking place in realms unseen. This belief produced a body of literature unlike anything that came before it. Texts that described journeys through the heavens, encounters with angels whose names were dangerous to pronounce, thrones of fire, wheels within wheels, palaces guarded by beings that could destroy the unworthy with a glance. These were not symbolic stories. They were maps. The ascent literature of ancient Judaism laid the groundwork for ideas that would later be absorbed into Christianity. Concepts like heaven and hell, angels and demons, judgment and resurrection, the Son of Man enthroned beside God, and the transformation of the human soul after death, all emerged from this apocalyptic worldview. Christianity did not invent these ideas. It inherited them. What makes this history unsettling is not simply that Christianity borrowed from Jewish mysticism. It is that the earliest Christian writers understood Jesus himself through the lens of ascent, not merely as a teacher or prophet, but as a figure who crossed between worlds, descended from heaven, and returned there in glory. The foundations of Christianity were not built on doctrine alone, they were built on visions. Apocalyptic Judaism was not about predicting the end of the world in the modern sense. It was about revealing what was hidden. The word apocalypse itself means unveiling, and what these ancient texts sought to unveil was the true structure of reality. According to this worldview, the cosmos was divided into multiple layers. The earthly realm was only the lowest and most distorted reflection of a much larger divine order. Above it existed a series of heavens populated by angels, powers, and cosmic rulers. Above them sat the throne of God, surrounded by fire, light, and unapproachable holiness. Human history, according to apocalyptic thinkers, was shaped by conflicts in these higher realms. Empires rose, not merely through armies and politics, but because spiritual powers operated behind the scenes. Suffering on earth was evidence of imbalance in heaven. This belief created a radical shift in how people understood salvation. Instead of focusing solely on obedience to the law, apocalyptic mystics emphasized revelation. Knowledge of the hidden world became the key to endurance. This is why so many Jewish apocalyptic texts are written in the first person. They describe a seer who is taken up into the heavens, shown divine secrets, and then sent back to deliver a message. The Book of Enoch is the most famous example, but it is far from unique. In these texts, ascent is not optional, it is essential. The seer does not simply observe heaven, he is transformed by it. His body becomes luminous. His understanding expands. He learns the names of angels, the structure of the cosmos, and the timetable of divine judgment. This transformation is not metaphorical. It is ontological. The human becomes something other. This idea would later become central to early Christian theology. The belief that humans could be transformed into immortal beings, clothed in glory, seated among the angels, did not emerge in a vacuum. It came directly from apocalyptic ascent traditions. Even the idea of resurrection is deeply tied to this worldview. Resurrection was not merely about returning to life. It was about elevation, a movement from the corrupted flesh of the lower world into a perfected heavenly state. Christianity inherited this vision and reframed it around a single figure, Jesus. One of the most important titles used in early Christianity is Son of Man. Modern readers often misunderstand this phrase, assuming it emphasizes humanity. In apocalyptic literature, it means the opposite. The Son of Man is a heavenly figure. This concept comes directly from Jewish apocalyptic texts, especially the Book of Daniel and the parables of Enoch. In these writings, the Son of Man is a pre-existent being who resides in heaven, sits beside God, and will descend at the end of time to judge the world. He is not born on earth. He descends to it. When early Christians applied this title to Jesus, they were making a radical claim. They were not simply calling him a righteous teacher. They were identifying him with a cosmic figure who moves between realms. The Gospels are filled with ascent language once it is recognized. Jesus speaks of descending from heaven. He describes angels ascending and descending upon him. He promises that his followers will see him seated at the right hand of power. After his death, the narrative does not end with burial. It ends with ascension, a return to the heavenly realm from which he came. This structure mirrors apocalyptic ascent stories almost perfectly. Descent into the world, revelation of hidden knowledge, conflict with earthly and cosmic powers, death, vindication, ascent. Early Christians understood Jesus as the ultimate apocalyptic seer, one who did not merely visit heaven, but originated there. This belief would shape Christian theology for centuries. It explains why early debates focused so intensely on the nature of Christ. Was he human? Was he divine? Was he both? These questions only make sense in a worldview where ascent is possible. Ancient ascent texts do not speak with curiosity. They speak with warning. Again and again, the reader is reminded that ascent can fail, that incorrect words lead to erasure, that angels are not guides, but gatekeepers, that the heavens are not welcoming. In these traditions, knowledge is not empowering by default, it is destabilizing. To ascent without preparation was to risk fragmentation of the self. This is why ascent was never taught openly. It was not hidden to protect the masses from ignorance. It was hidden to protect them from collapse. This reframes ascent as dangerous, not mystical tourism. Ascent was not merely a belief, it was a practice. Within ancient Jewish mysticism, ascent was understood as something that could be attempted under specific conditions. It required ritual purity, fasting, prayer, and precise knowledge of divine names. The goal was not curiosity. The goal was survival. The heavenly realms were dangerous. Texts from this period describe multiple layers of heaven, each guarded by angelic beings who tested the worthiness of the ascending soul. Incorrect words, improper timing, or spiritual impurity could result in annihilation. The ascent literature is filled with warnings because ascent was never guaranteed to end in return. This produced a spiritual elite. Those who possessed the knowledge of ascent were not ordinary believers. They were initiates, They understood the cosmos as a hierarchy of powers, and believed that revelation belonged only to those capable of enduring it. This mindset deeply influenced early Christian communities. Contrary to later portrayals, the earliest followers of Jesus did not view salvation as automatic or universal. They believed that spiritual knowledge separated the awakened from the blind. This is why early Christian writings place such emphasis on mysteries, revelations, and hidden wisdom. Paul speaks of being caught up into the third heaven. Other texts describe journeys beyond the stars, encounters with angels, and secret teachings reserved for the mature. Christianity did not begin as a simple moral system. It began as a continuation of Ascent Mysticism, now centered on a messianic figure believed to have already completed the journey. Jesus was not only the guide, he was the proof that ascent was possible. This belief created tension. As Christianity spread, its mystical roots threatened stability. Ascent knowledge empowered individuals, not institutions. It suggested that access to the divine was personal and experiential, not mediated solely through authority. This tension would eventually reshape Christianity itself. If ascent shaped early Christianity, then salvation was never about forgiveness alone. It was about orientation, about alignment within a cosmic structure. Sin was not simply moral failure, it was misplacement, a soul positioned incorrectly within the hierarchy of reality. Seen this way, redemption is not legal pardon, it is relocation. This is a paradigm shift moment. It forces reinterpretation. Apocalyptic ascent literature is inseparable from angelology. The heavens were not imagined as empty or abstract. They were structured realms filled with hierarchies of beings whose functions defined how reality itself operated. Angels governed natural forces. Others were assigned to nations and peoples. Some acted as messengers. Others enforced boundaries. There were loyal powers and rebellious ones, aligned not by morality alone, but by position within the cosmic order. This worldview introduced the concept of cosmic warfare. History on Earth was understood as the surface expression of conflict occurring above. Wars, famines, and oppression were not random events. They were manifestations of tension between rival spiritual authorities. Early Christianity absorbed this framework almost entirely. The New Testament repeatedly references principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual forces operating in heavenly realms. These were not symbolic places. They were believed to be active intelligences embedded within the structure of existence. Jesus confronts demons not as psychological projections, but as agents of a larger cosmic system. His authority over them is presented as evidence of elevated status within the heavenly hierarchy. He does not argue with these forces, he commands them. Within this framework, salvation takes on a different meaning. To be saved is not merely to be forgiven, it is to be transferred, a movement from one sphere of authority into another. Baptism reflects this logic. It symbolizes descent and ascent. The believer dies to one cosmic order and rises aligned with another. This is not metaphorical rebirth alone. It is repositioning within reality. Early Christian writings describe believers as citizens of heaven because identity was no longer grounded in geography or empire. It was grounded in cosmic affiliation. This belief carried enormous psychological power. Persecuted communities could reinterpret suffering as participation in a larger struggle. Martyrdom was not defeat. It was ascent through death, a final crossing from the lower world into the higher order. Christianity spread not because it offered comfort, but because it offered transcendence. But this is where a critical transformation occurred. As the movement grew and institutionalized, ascent shifted from experience to doctrine. Direct encounter gave way to mediated belief. The journey through the heavens became something that had happened once in sacred history, not something repeated by living practitioners. The shift from ascent to doctrine did more than stabilize religion. It changed the human relationship to the divine. It trained generations to believe that heaven is unreachable, that revelation belongs to the past, and that transcendence must be mediated. The result was not obedience, it was dependence. And this raises an uncomfortable question. If ascent was once possible, and if it was intentionally sealed, then what does that say about the limits we now accept as natural? Because if access was removed, not lost, then the boundary between heaven and earth may not be fixed. It may have been imposed. As Christianity expanded, its apocalyptic roots faced a problem. Visions are unstable. Ascent experiences cannot be standardized. Knowledge that empowers individuals threatens centralized control. The solution was doctrine. Over time, the mystical language of ascent was gradually reinterpreted. Heaven became a distant destination rather than a navigable structure. Angels became symbolic messengers rather than guardians of cosmic gates. The transformation of the soul was deferred to the afterlife. This shift did not happen overnight. It unfolded over centuries. Early debates over orthodoxy were not simply theological. They were battles over who controlled access to the divine. Groups that emphasized direct revelation were labeled heretical. Texts describing ascent journeys were excluded or reinterpreted. What remained was a theological framework built on the bones of apocalyptic mysticism. The structure endured even as the practice faded. Jesus remained the one who descended and ascended. Heaven remained layered. Judgment remained cosmic, but the path was no longer experiential. It was institutional. This transformation allowed Christianity to survive empire. It also buried its most dangerous ideas. Yet traces remain. Every reference to angels ascending and descending. Every mention of hidden wisdom. Every image of Christ enthroned among celestial powers points back to an older vision. A vision where humans could rise. The foundations of Christianity were laid not by philosophers, but by visionaries. People who believed that heaven could be entered, not imagined. Apocalyptic Jewish ascent, Esotericism shaped Christianity at its deepest level. It defined its cosmology, its savior figure, and its understanding of salvation. What changed was not the structure, but access. Modern Christianity often reads these ancient texts symbolically, but for their original authors, they described a real universe with real dangers and real possibilities. The question that remains is not whether ascent was true. It is why it was abandoned. Perhaps it was too powerful. Perhaps it demanded too much. Or perhaps it threatened systems built on obedience rather than transformation. The ascent tradition was not destroyed. It was rendered inaccessible, preserved in language that no longer instructs, only hints. Symbols remain, but the methods are gone, or perhaps withheld. Because ascent was never about belief. It was about readiness, and not everyone was meant to be ready. If early Christianity began in the heavens, then what we practice today may only be its shadow, a memory of something far more dangerous than doctrine ever allowed. And if that is true, then the question is not whether ascent still exists. The question is who decided that it no longer belonged to us. Subscribe.